There are two types of illicit trade. The illicit trade that is the consequence of informality. We know that in our borders we have lots of transactions that don't go through customs and don't get actually accounted, which serves to explain why intra-Africa trade sometimes is underestimated. And then there is the illicit trade that is the result of very complex, sophisticated, organized crime that is also preventing public resources from being collected and is actually not benefiting for the common good. So what we need to institute is formalization, but also facilitation, easiness of providing the instruments, what is called trade facilitation. So we have a much stronger basis for countries to have cross-border operations and for value chains to be established. Now, what we know is that illicit trade right now is thriving. And we know also illicit financial flows are thriving. And they are thriving because despite all the arguments about security, making sure that our boards are controlled, and all these reasons that those who oppose CFTA normally put at the table, the reality is exactly the opposite. It's because we don't have the easiness of doing trade through the normal channels, and because we don't provide the basis for the establishment of predictable forms of economic transaction, that we have this type of operations going more and more into the direction of undermining our regional integration. Curbing illicit flows is about making sure that we put in place the tools and instruments and the policies that are going to regulate our transactions in a way that we don't have all this profiteering going on. But let's make no mistake, it's not just an African problem. This is a global problem. And part of the incentives for illicit flows to continue to flow are precisely the reasons that make this an African problem with global solutions. So we need more than just goodwill on the part of the African leaders, the African governments, the African interlocutors. But I think we have to do our part. And the part that Africa can do is to put in place regulatory schemes that are going to be much more stringent and much more capable of catching this type of operations. And that is very much the same philosophy that is behind the CFTA. The CFTA needs to have protocols. CFTA needs to have a dispute settlement mechanism. It needs to understand exactly what are the consequences of determining such or such type of intellectual property regimes. It needs to make predictability part of the operations. It needs trade observatory that is going to inform people about the best practices. So all these tools and mechanisms are very similar to the type of policies that are required for tackling the issue of illicit financial flows. So if we are going in the direction of solving one problem, we'll certainly be able to solve the other one as well. Trade negotiations are very complex. They require a lot of technical details to be sorted out. And I think if you look into the speed under which these current negotiations have been mastering the signing of protocols, the signing of a ratification of protocols, and so on, we can be satisfied that there is momentum. Of course, COVID has perturbed the calendar for everything, including, obviously, the CFTA that was about to be entering into force, that was going to have a special summit under the South African presidency, and all of that has been postponed. But still, Africans have demonstrated their will by making the opening of the Secretariat a reality, even during a pandemic. They have finally attained universal ratification. And they have continued the negotiations remotely. So these are indications that there is no doubt this type of demonstrations of will are pointing into a completely different agency on the part of the African countries. And let's not forget that our negotiations with our largest trading partner bloc, which is the European Union, have also continued apace. And we have now definitely reached an understanding amongst Africans that we need to defend our interests, and that requires postponement for good reasons, not necessarily for bad reasons. So some of the postponements are not necessarily bad. What we know is that the technicalities of a trade agreement will go for quite some time into a negotiation stage. I don't predict that the CFTA will be understood, implemented in detail by the border guard until 3 years down the line. So let's not rush on things that require substantiation, sophistication, and that definitely is going to put the basis for a much larger undertaking, which is a free market.